Escape. 2 DOS.
Episode 3, Lightning and Mobos. This time we're going to look at the motherboards that I brought home in the lot of computers. Just as I had wedged in the last of the computers, the gentleman that sold me this stuff said, "Hey, do you want some motherboards?" And I couldn't say no. Here is a rundown of all the boards, starting with number 8. The Intel desktop board, the Asus A7V, the Asus M2N68-LA, the MSI 6309 version 2.1, the QDI P6V693A/A9, the Matsonic Pcchips M576, the Pcchips M507, and lastly the Titan S1662 Pentium Pro. There's a storm coming in. Batten down your hatches, shutter your windows, put on your anti-static wristbands. It's time to electrify these motherboards. Starting with number 8. It's the Intel desktop board. Basically the same thing that I found in machines number 12 and number 10. You can find this board at the RetroWeb. Coincidentally, as I was working on episode 2, Tech Tangents had released a video with a bunch of these boards showing them all linked together playing Doom. There's no onboard graphics, so I'm using this ATI Rage 128 Pro, and I know it works. Unlike any of these CR2032s I've found on these motherboards. 0.1 volts. For testing, I was using a hard drive with a Windows 98 install. I plugged in the CD-ROM in order to update the files on that hard drive so it could work with this board to get me to this point. Splash screen. Off screen, I updated all the drivers so they would just boot up correctly as it's just about to. So this motherboard is fully functional. I'm going to donate it with the other 2, and maybe somebody will build 3 machines and sync them all together and play Doom just like Tech Tangents. Board number 7 is another Pentium 4 machine. It is the Asus A7V. Just like the previous, I want to make sure this thing functions correctly before I put it in a box. Whoever ends up with this thing, you can of course find all of the information, the manual, etc. that you need at the RetroWeb. There's another dusty CR2032, providing us with 0.01 volts this time, replaced with a good one. This is the first of a couple of failed attempts. I was unable to get it to post. And these boards sat around probably just as long as the machines did, so spray them with contact cleaner, plug it all back together, and the same thing. No post, no beeps, no nothing. And after a few other failed attempts, I decided to try a different RAM module. Much to my surprise, this one worked. So the next thing I have to do is find out if it'll boot up correctly. So I installed a CF card and had to reconfigure things slightly. And it recognizes CF card, gets into that, and sits and does nothing. So I tried my SD card and detects, and then does nothing. So I tried the hard drive. It recognizes, it detects, and it works. Boots into Windows 98, no problem. And we're off to the next board. Which brings us to board number 6. This is the Asus M2N68-LA. This is probably the newest out of all this gear, and it doesn't interest me at all, but it does have complete information at the RetroWeb. So I thought I had connected up everything correctly, and I made a major oversight. I had the hard drive hooked up, and I got this annoying beeping sound. Yeah, that's all it would do. So I start with the obvious. And there was a CR2032 that was in this board. The first picture didn't show that, but oh wow, 0.2 this time. We're climbing. So we're reassembled. Memory modules are back in. Hit the switch. Comes to life. First thing it decides to do is complain about the system fan not being connected, which I bypass. The next thing it complained about was my Windows 98 installation on that old hard drive. And no matter what I did, it just exited out. And I was forced to try something different. And then I realized this. I only had 20 of the 24 pins the thing was supposed to be getting from the power supply. But when I found the appropriate power supply, it didn't make any difference. It would not boot with that hard drive. So I tried a SATA drive with an XP install, and I had success with that. And Windows XP, our old friend, there it is. Working just like it's supposed to, even pinball. So, that is 3 for 3 so far. They are 3 Pentium 4 boards that I have no interest in, but at least we know they're going to work. So when I donate them, somebody's going to get something that's functional, not just some old junk. Next up is number 5. This is an MSI board, the MS6309. This is a socket 370 board, which will take a Pentium 3 chip. The RetroWeb has a lot of information about this board. That's good to see. It has all the drivers, it has the BIOS files, it's got the manual. Look at all these processors this thing can use. Back in part 1, I mentioned that I was hoping this would work better than my other 6309, which is the version 1, where the onboard game port conflicts with the Sound Blaster game port. It's a disaster. So this needs a battery as well. This is the beginning of many failed attempts. No matter what I did with this board, nothing. Not a sausage. But you got to keep in mind, this is the board that had the bulging capacitors on it. And to be safe, I probably shouldn't have even tried to start this thing because of the condition they were in. So no matter what I tried, whether it was changing the RAM modules or trying a different video card, lightning would not bring life to this motherboard. So my next thought is maybe the processor is fried on this one. Unlikely, but I have a good one and we can find out for sure if that's the problem. And I'm pleasantly surprised to find that's the 866 megahertz chip. But as you probably guessed already, no, even with the exact same 866 megahertz chip, nothing. So we have no choice but to make another video, and I will have to recap this board and have a really good look at it to make sure that there's no traces that are damaged or anything on the back. But yeah, doesn't work. Number 4. This board I already admitted back in part 1, I think, that I had tried it briefly just because I was trying to deal with that game port issue. There's plenty of information at the RetroWeb for this one, of course, and I was under the mistaken impression that this would only take a 500 megahertz chip, but apparently it can take plenty more than that. So that's exciting news. I will look forward to that. Just to verify this thing does work on camera. There we go. Post beep. And it comes up with the QDI splash screen, which I don't hate yet, so I won't disable that. Maybe someday I will. And of course, the CMOS battery is dead on this one. It's even worse than the previous. So I install a better battery. I put in the CF card with a Windows 98 installation on it. And everything boots up just like I assumed it would. And this board is a complete success. Up next, number 3. This is a Matsonic /Pcchips M576, the notorious Pcchips, which we are going to find out later why exactly. RetroWeb has all the information on this that I need. And this CMOS battery has 0.3 volts, coincidentally. Snap in a replacement, hit the lightning button, and what do we get? Awkwardly put my finger in the lens, and we have life. Comes up with the Matsonic branding where the Energy Star usually is. And I've never seen a flashing CPU warning before, so I decided it would be best to have a look and see what it is. And underneath this unnecessary pile of sludge, it is a Cyrix M2 chip. Days ago, Colin at This Does Not Compute was explaining about the 300 chip and how the ratings are kind of bogus. 83 times 2.5 equals 207, not 266. And as I'm going to find out, this BIOS doesn't allow for 83 megahertz CPUs anyway, which means that it's going to run at 187 megahertz, which was a problem when these were first released, and I'm experiencing it right now. It says that it's running at PR 266, which they claim that's the equivalent speed, which I would have to see that to believe it. At a later date, I guess I'll have to try a 266 Pentium chip against the Cyrix and see what kind of competition there is. So the Matsonic has onboard sound, which maybe that's what the Sonic in Matsonic stands for. It has the C-Media 8330 chip on board, and I set that up. So here we are. All the drivers are loaded. Everything is ready to go. Complete with my e-waste salvaged beige speakers. There's actually a subwoofer that's connected up to that. It's on the floor. Yes, and that was the post beat going through the speakers. So, I've loaded the FM synthesis drivers for Windows 98 for the CMI 8330. Digital sound is working just fine. In the Sound Blaster Pro directory, you can find reggae.mid. I'm going to run that right now, and you're going to hear exactly what this sounds like. You decide for yourself what you think. So that is the C-Media 3880 chip. Sounds pretty good to me. I'll have to do a test with the Sound Blaster Pro and see which sounds better, or if they sound exactly the same. So in order to use this, I needed to figure out the PS2 port for the mouse. When it comes to pinouts, I don't make assumptions. I check the manual before I fry anything. Ask me how I know. But the pinout in the manual for this board and others similar to it is wrong. It has pin 5, 6, 15, 16, whereas on the board it's 1 through 8. So I looked through a bunch of other Pcchips boards on the Retro website and I found something that worked. I'm using the StarTech PS2 bracket that you can get on Amazon. The PS2 header is labeled PS1. Brilliant. So I just connected the ground lead of my multimeter to the expansion slots. And then I'm going to test each of the pins just to verify that they're actually what they're supposed to be. I'm starting with the 5-volt pin. That's pin 8. And sure enough, I get 4.96 volts. Next, I try the clock, and I'm getting 0.01 volts. And I've tested that with other boards, and I got the same results. Ground, of course, should give you no voltage. The data line gave me 3 volts. I didn't show that, but yes, everything worked out just fine, as you've seen. The second last board is the Pcchips M507. This Pentium 150 chip is out of my own collection. This curiously didn't come with a processor chip. So I went to the retro web to get some information about this before I did anything stupid, and what did I find? Known issues, fake cache, like I suspected when I saw the write back stickers on them. So, attempt number 1, no post. No beeps. Very peculiar. Number 2, same thing. Video card, change the video card. Change the RAM. And then I tried the postcard. And I get C6C1. And that was no help. So I had no choice but to start looking on the board. And I searched and I searched and I searched and I found that. The spot that I had overlooked several times. But it was already pretty late in the evening, so I decided to sleep on it. And then in the morning, I made this terrible repair job, but I thought, well, whatever, let's just see if it works. And something had changed. Something had actually changed with that tiny little repair. So I plugged the video card back in, turned the camera around, send it a bolt of lightning, and... oh, yes! The only board that didn't have a processor in it, and here it was, back in service. This one didn't even have a CMOS battery in it, so all the settings were lost, so I had to go in and fix those first before it would recognize my 150 megahertz chip. But returning to the cache issue, it says, write back cache on. Most motherboards will just say either cache absent or no cache if that's the case. But some of these Pcchips boards, they'll just say write back cache on, which is how they got away with faking cache chips. I did find some information saying that the updated BIOS would hopefully correct this problem, so I'll try that at a later date. But if that does fail, I have ordered a Coast module, the cache on a stick from Electromine in Germany, so whenever that arrives, we'll have to give that a go. At this point, I have reset the BIOS so that it's reading 150 megahertz, and the CF card is being recognized, and we're about to launch into Windows 98 on this once dead board, which currently has probably fake cache chips and the tiniest little copper wire that is fixing that broken trace. I'm speeding up this next part because it needs to install the drivers to get Windows to load correctly. And when I finished that, I exited into DOS. So then I decided to run cache check. And of course, this machine seems to have one cache, no signs of any L2 cache whatsoever. So maybe that updated BIOS will recognize the fake cache chips and bring them back to life. But I kind of doubt that, and that's why I ordered that Coast module. While I'm in here, I decided to check out the CPU speed within system information, which comes up with 475. I don't have anything to compare that to, so I'm guessing that's okay. Next, I do the 3D bench, the faster PC version, and it whips through this pretty quick. And the speed is 98.1. We'll just save that for future reference when we test it with cache one way or the other. So on further examination, I may just have to crack open one of those chips and see if there's any guts in them. Because if they're fake, I'll probably just take them off the board. Because that really sucks. Mobo number 1. The tie-in S1662 Pentium Pro Dual Pentium Pro board. And back at the retro web, there it is. On the downloads page, there are drivers, there are BIOS, that's the latest 5.01, which I'm going to find out I already have. And on the CPUs, my board has the second on the list there, the 200 megahertz with the 256K cache. So I give it a bolt of lightning. Everything looks like it's functioning. It shows the Pentium Pro CPU at 200 megahertz, and also I can see that it's version 5.01 for the BIOS. So this is as good as it's going to get. And it counts up to 196,000K. And then I noticed this. One processor detected. But it's the first time I've turned this board on, so I'm guessing maybe it's a settings thing. But before I try to figure that out, I plug in my CF card and see if I can run Windows 98 just to verify this machine will do anything. It recognizes my CF card, and it gives me the usual errors about the CMOS battery failing. This board has the Dallas RTC module, and it was not soldered directly to the board, so I was able to remove it quite easily. And Windows 98 appears, which I have to reinstall the drivers in order for it to work with this board. All right, I'm going to speed this part up so I don't bore you to tears. And, well, everything seems to be working. It was taking a little extra time to redraw every window, but I decided to do a benchmark test. And it seems to race through the test fast enough, but it comes up with 66.6. Now, this is the slower PC test. Now I'm going to try the faster PC test, number 2, which gives me quite a bit more, 151.2. So that makes no sense. It also says that the Pentium processor is 225 megahertz, and we're getting a speed rating of 498.8. So I decide to do a cache check due to the previous results, and it says genuine Intel clocked at 0.0 megahertz. Very strange. Maybe it's due to the other chip not being recognized. I do have it selected correctly with the jumpers. So my first thought is maybe it's that stupid Dallas module. I've already rebuilt one of these for an old 386 board. I dug out a slightly damaged battery holder, which I had to repair, and put it together. That made no difference. So I took the processors out. I tested them both in socket 1, and they worked fine. And unlike anything I've dealt with before, this board uses voltage regulator modules. That's VRM0 for CPU 0 and VRM1 for CPU 1, obviously. And both worked perfectly in VRM slot 1. I'll have to do a deeper dive into this at a later date because this is annoying. I had a good look on the other side of the board, and unfortunately I could not find any traces that were broken. So maybe it's a component that has failed. I have no idea at this point. If you have any history with these boards or any ideas, please let me know. I would love to try to make this thing work with 2 processors. So in conclusion, there are 8 boards. The first 3 work just fine, and they're going to find a nice home somewhere else. Number 5 is the only one that wouldn't post. It's suffering the bulging capacitor issue, so I will have to do a recap, and hopefully that brings it back to life. The QDI board is in excellent shape, and it's ready to become an awesome new retro machine. Number 3, the Matsonic is in perfect working order as well, and it has onboard sound, and as far as I can tell, it's pretty good. We're going to compare that to the Sound Blaster Pro. Number 2, the Pcchips M507 was brought back from the dead with one of the worst repairs I've done so far. But this board possibly has fake chips on it, and we're going to find out at a later date. And this brings us to the star of the show, number 1, the Dual Pentium Pro board. But fingers crossed, maybe at some point we'll see this thing come to life with 2 full processors. Next time, The Purge. Episode 4, we'll be gutting all those machines with the unnecessary P4s and probably replacing them with something way, way cooler.